So I'm Kecia Ray, and I am located in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm the CEO of K20 Connect, and I'm here to talk to you about education and the incredible market that it is. And is it a market worth chasing, worth you chasing? So let's get going. 98.6% of learners worldwide were affected by the pandemic. No surprise. And UNESCO warns that 117 million students around the world were still out of school at the beginning of this school year. So at the beginning of the 2021 school year, that many students were still out of school because of the pandemic and the effects thereof. Now, the Netherlands were a country that were the least impacted, so to speak, because they were out the least amount of time for the pandemic. And because they were out the least amount of time, they wanted to make sure that they had a pretty clear understanding of where their learners were as they were kind of coming out of the period of time that they were out. It was about 8 weeks. So they conducted a study on the estimated loss of learning, and they found that 1/5 of a school year was lost in that very short, brief period of time that they were out. 1/5 of a school year was lost because they were out for about 8 weeks. Another study was conducted out of India, and what they did is they looked at all the events that have happened worldwide that were considered catastrophic. So tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, anything that would shut down, hurricanes that would shut down a school system or a ministry so that they could not provide education to their students. And they looked back 10 years at all of this data, and they found the exact same thing, that there were about 1/5 of a school year lost as a result of these shutdowns, as a result of these catastrophic events. So we have a pretty clear understanding that when students' learning is disrupted for whatever reason, they're going to lose learning, and they're going to lose approximately 1/5 of a school year, almost independent of how long they're down. At least if they're out a month or more, definitely 1/5 of a school year is going to be lost. So what do you do? Well, some studies have come out recently that reference what we can do and what we should be doing to reignite, re-engage, and re-motivate our learners. This study came out from the International Journal of Education Development, and this author looked at a lot of different studies, kind of a meta-analysis, and modeled the long-run impact on learning that COVID-19 has had. And then she looked at what we could do to mitigate the loss of that learning. And what she found was we really need to reorient to the curriculum, reorient students to the subject matter, right? And then we also need to align how we're teaching and how we're presenting that content to a child's individual personal learning needs. So personalizing learning, which many of us have heard that term for some time now. She also determined that any blended learning methodologies that you could incorporate in your instructional models would help you accelerate the growth that your students would have. And as a matter of fact, she predicted that you could not only mitigate the loss that you have as a result of being out from the pandemic, but you could also accelerate up to a year's worth of learning when you adopt these strategies. So reorienting to the curriculum, personalizing instruction, and then using blended methodologies for instruction. So it's a great study. The next study that I love to talk about came out also. These all came out between 2020 and 2021. So they're very recent studies, and they all are focused on, except for one, the pandemic and the outcomes from the pandemic. This one, Economic Letters Volume 2, the study is Learning During COVID. It's not who you teach, but how you teach. And it's talking about active learning and the pedagogy that we all know works to improve student outcomes, even during COVID. So no matter what format that you're using, whether you're online, whether you're hybrid, whether you're in person, the more active our learners can be and the more engaged our learners can be with the content, the better the student outcomes are going to be overall. So clickers, polling, small group instruction, collaboration, peer instruction, all of those are strategies that we can employ to activate that active learning in our classrooms, which in turn is going to increase student outcomes. Makes sense? A little bit challenging to pull off. We need good tools for that, but it definitely will result in higher student outcomes. And the final study that I like to talk about came out in 2018, and it's out of Turkey. And Turkey has in their systems, they have interactive boards in every classroom. And so most of the research around interactive display, whiteboard technology comes out of Turkey because they have such a wonderful resource in their classrooms. This particular study shows that children's achievement can be enhanced through learning through using interactive display, interactive panels, and because it creates that active learning environment that that previous study talked about. So anytime you can use the technology to create an active learning environment, then you're going to have a positive effect on learning. You have to crosswalk that research as a developer or as a company selling into the space. You have to make sure that your product can show engagement or activation of engagement, and then you can crosswalk it to student outcomes, because we know that the more engaged learners are, the higher they perform on any kind of assessments. And that is certainly true for interactive whiteboard technology. Now, what does all this mean to us today? Well, I've identified 13 trends that I believe are going to change education worldwide after the pandemic. I don't think that education is ever going to go back to exactly how it was pre-pandemic or pre-lockdown, or however we want to refer to that. I think that it will always be different than what it was then. And some of the trends we're familiar with, but I think some of the trends are going to accelerate beyond what they had been able to accelerate pre-pandemic or pre-COVID. So here are the 13 trends to watch. Number one, social emotional learning. SEL is something that many systems are adopting as we're coming out of lockdown. Students, almost 1 billion students were affected worldwide with the lockdown. And so reorienting those students to their classrooms and to a normal interaction with other children is something that we have to work on. And that means focusing on social and emotional well-being of our learners. The AIR Institute in the US has a wonderful study that has just come out on how SEL can actually help students not only in their primary years, but also in their tertiary years and in career as well. So social emotional learning, definitely a trend. The other trend is early literacy. So I think one thing that we have been able to identify in our time of lockdown is that there is a massive discrepancy in resources available to different types of children who we serve. And early literacy is one of those areas that we know if we can attend to the literacy of our younger children, our younger population, then they come to school more prepared than ever to learn. So there's going to be a big focus, I believe, on early literacy worldwide. And we've seen some countries actually accelerate their funding of early literacy over any other type of education funding, because they see the benefit of funding early literacy to prepare your learners long term. Online learning, I don't think it's going to go away. I think we're going to have it. I think we're going to have it as an option in a lot of systems. I think even though we may not depend on it as much as we did during lockdown to keep the doors open, so to speak, we're definitely going to have it as an option. I think we found during this time that online learning can work for some students. I also think we found that it can help us adapt or adjust our schedules so that when we have reduction of staff or we can't, people are out sick, we can still continue the learning through an online option. So I don't think that online learning is going away. And I think it's not only going to be in our primary schools, but I think it's going to be in secondary, tertiary. I think every aspect of education is going to incorporate some type of online option, some type of online class. So online learning, here to stay. Blended learning, which is an adaptation, if you will. It's where you take online learning, you combine it with face-to-face learning, and you have kind of the best of both in your physical classroom. So new study came out. This is from study.com. They actually conducted the study, and they found that 95% of teachers say blended learning can increase student engagement and improve academic performance. And we actually have a lot of academic studies that prove that as well. In fact, we can see as much as 20% gains academically when you implement blended learning, which is a huge, huge amount of gains. 72% of teachers use blended learning lessons, and we know that 90% of the teachers that adopted blended learning strategies during this pandemic phase of teaching plan to continue teaching in this way. So, and that research comes out of the Christensen Institute. So we know that the teachers who adopted teaching in a blended format that's online and in person might have heard it called hybrid during the pandemic because the teacher might have been physical with a few kids that came in and most kids were online. But blended is where kids are going to come to class, but content is going to be available online. And they may rotate through that content that's online, or they may flip and have some content before they come into the physical environment, or they may have periods of the day where they're taking an online class and then taking classes in person. All of those are part of blended. Hybrid is kind of in the middle. If you're looking at the continuum, you have blended, and hybrid is kind of in the middle, and then online is at the other end of that continuum. So it's all good if you are thinking about selling into the education market and you've got a wonderful technology product, because blended learning requires a lot of technology. Another trend that I believe is going to pick up is artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I don't really have to say a lot about that. You probably all know that very, very well, but I do think we're going to see the use of more algorithms and the use of more software that incorporate AI into their platform as we move into this kind of post-pandemic era. Software integration, I think, is going to be something. It's something that most systems have attempted. I think it's going to rise to the top. We now know the significance of data. We know the significance of systems working and working well and integrating well, so there's no downtime to instruction or really any aspect of the system. So we have this concept of having remote workers, having online learners. We have to have software integration that can facilitate supporting that. That's absolutely going to be top of mind for a lot of CIOs as we're coming out of this. Flexible seating or flexible classrooms is something else I see trending. You know, our students were, at their homes, being able to kind of sit in whatever kind of chair or whatever kind of environment they wanted to. When they come back, they're going to want to continue being comfortable. And so adopting a flexible seating, flexible learning environment is going to be something that we're going to definitely see. And I think it's going to trend even more next year when more and more kids are coming back to school and back to physical environments. Professional development is definitely something that we're going to see. Professional development is something that every single teacher needs in order to catch up to these trends and know how to incorporate some of these things into their classrooms. So focusing on that is something systems really need to do. Coaching is kind of coupled with that, where you can provide individual coaching to teachers and to administrators so that they can better serve their students, especially in these new types of learning environments and using different strategies and different technologies. I think assessment is going to look completely different than it ever has. We've learned now that the coming in and taking your test and sitting for tests could be problematic. And so I think it's going to turn to options where you're going to have a different way of testing, possibly portfolio testing, or we're going to have a lot more online testing environments than we've ever had before. And some ministries and some systems buy into online assessment. Some are challenged by it, but I really think that it's going to be pushed in the next 10 years. And we're going to see a lot more options with different types of assessment. Career academies is something that is really kind of concentrated in the US, but other countries are beginning to adopt. I was in a conference last week with Thailand, who's considering career academies in their country. Career academies essentially means that you are focused on the careers that are in your community or in your area when you are designing your instruction, and you're preparing your students in your schools to enter into those career fields so that they can provide a workforce and continue to build your community. What we've seen in the States is a lot of our kids move around. They don't stay to work in their hometowns. And so as a result of that, businesses go out because there's no employees. So career academies is a way to kind of build your base of employees within your own community so that you've got this great kind of resource for employment once they come out of high school or once they come out of secondary. Another trend is going to be parents as partners. I don't think I have to say anymore, but parents have taken a really big role in working with their kids. And then finally, it's going to be data privacy and then the role that politics plays in education, specifically funding. So those are my trends that I think we're going to see going forward. And now I want to share some numbers with you. So here's some international education statistics. As of January 2021, 214 million kids worldwide were still out of school due to school closures. February, 130 countries had implemented school closures. 126 million pre-primary and secondary school students were affected by school closures. So that's a tremendous amount of, pre-primary and secondary. The 214 includes early literacy and tertiary. And then February, we have almost 1 billion learners worldwide affected by COVID. And that's physically affected, like they got sick. Researchers found out that 53% of children in our more impoverished countries can't read proficiently. And that's not just countries. We see that within countries that might not be low and middle income. They may have high income base, but they still have low and middle income populations. And these studies have found that they are experiencing challenges with reading and catching up with reading. And then 50% of the students worldwide don't have a computer. So we've got to keep that in mind when we're building technologies for the future. And 56 million don't have access to stable internet. So we also have to keep that in mind. We have to couple everything that we're doing around technology with access, right? Do they have access to a computer? Do they have access to the internet? Now here's some other numbers for you to take a look at. The education service industry, this is US centric, has an annual growth rate of 1.3% between 2016 and 2021. The higher ed market was valued at $65.4 billion in 2019, but has an estimated annual growth of 8.25% by 2027. Global online education, so this is worldwide, is projected to reach $247.46 billion by 2024. So if you're developing a product that's going to support online education, you are in the right lane. You're in the right room if you're in this room. The AR and VR market in education is expected to reach 12.6 billion by 2025. I think that this is also a market that we're going to see trending up. I don't list it in my trends because it's really something that isn't highly adopted right now to be considered a trend, but I do think in the next 5 years it's going to be a trend. The US market is projected to reach 1.9 trillion by 2025. And it's seen increases just in 2020. So there's plenty of opportunity in the US. But worldwide, we see these numbers, right? So you've got a lot of opportunity in the education market. And then we've got a lot of venture capital rounds taking place. So we have a lot of opportunity in funding, and we have a lot of opportunity in sales. So my time is up. And I just want to share there's plenty of opportunities in the edgy market. Don't miss out. And if you need any help, here's my name, number, and contact information, and I'm happy to help you.